Welcome, everyone. Welcome to this public webinar. The title is Equity in the Flow, Exploring Gender and Values in Water Decision Making. We have a keynote and a great panel for you today, and we have already have some questions from you that we will tackle at the end of the keynote. So we're really excited about those. My name is Sofia de la Rosa. I'm part of the Value in Water Initiative. We are happy to be collaborating with the Community of Women in Water to share this time with you today in their public yearly seminar. You will see a poll in your screens. You can fill that poll for now and introduce yourself in the chat. And I have two quick housekeeping points. Maybe, yeah, that's the slides. So the housekeeping points. So this webinar will be recorded and it will be public. So share with you. So keep that in mind. And we have a code of conduct in which we ask you to please be kind and respectful with the participants, with the panelists, and with the keynote. So please, we ask you to do that. Now we can move again to the next slide, and we can perhaps start seeing the results of the poll, if I am correct. I don't see them yet. For those entering now, we kindly ask you to fill in the poll and to introduce yourself in the chat. Also remind you that this meeting is being recorded. Okay. In the meanwhile, while I see the results of the poll, I want to briefly introduce the Value in Water Initiative, which is the program that I work for. It's a Dutch-led program, and it aims to raise the profile of water in decision-making and to increase diversity of values in water governance. As part of our mission, we have created the Gender Journey, which gathers us today, and it aims to help us better understand how values and gender interact in water decision-making. We are happy to present the results of a part of that journey today. And to do so, I'm in the company of two great ladies. First one, Catherine Farr, who is the founder of the Community of Women in Water, and Dona Geagea, who will be giving the keynote. Catherine has more than a decade experience of working in water policy, including climate, gender, governance, finance. And Dona is a senior facilitator and researcher with a decade of working in water and with stakeholder engagement. She is now a postdoc at Wageningen University. So with that, I will give the word to Catherine to give us a bit of who will be moderating today's session.
Thanks so much, Sophia. It's really great to be here today. Welcome, everyone. We're really excited to have you at this webinar, which is the final event of this year's Gender Journey with the Valuing Water Initiative. To start us off, Dona is going to share some key insights for a literature review, looking at the intersection of values, gender, and water decision-making. And then she'll be joined by our other panelists, Yara and Dennis, who will each share a bit of their experiences before we jump into your questions. So it should be a really good hour. Now I'm going to go ahead and ask that we end the poll so we can share those results with you. So I will, and then, yeah, so everyone can see the shared results. And we want to just think about who's here today. So we can see in the first question, what comes to mind when you think about valuing water? Most people, 55% of those attending today, think first about getting access to safe water, and only 14% think about the price of water, and 32% said something else. So that's interesting. So a lot of us do think about valuing water as getting access to safe water. How often does your work involve considering the needs of different gender groups, so women, men, etc.? We've got 50% of people attending today said frequently, 32% sometimes, and only 5% said this hasn't come up. So that's really great. It gives us a little bit of a sense of what people are thinking about when they talk about valuing water when they come in today, and a bit of where they might be in engaging on incorporation of different gender groups. So this is really great to see. So we can stop sharing poll 1 now. Thanks so much. And I want to just let you know that while we will be largely using a lot of the registration questions that you gave us when you registered, we had fantastic questions, really, really good ones. We want to encourage you to ask questions today. So in the chat, feel free to use hashtag #PanelQ to ask your questions so that our team knows that these are specifically questions for the panel. You can start doing that now if you've come up with something as Donna goes through her keynote, as the conversation goes on. Please continue to put those questions in the chat. And without further ado, I will pass it over to Donna.
Thank you very much, Catherine. And I will just share my slides. Also, hello to everyone who's joined us today. So as has been already introduced, this work is very much part of the gender journey as part of the Valuing Water initiative. And it has been a really wonderful experience to be working on this with Catherine, with Sophia, and with the Valuing Water initiative team, as well as the RVO's climate and water team. And so today, I'm going to frame a little bit first, why is it still important to be talking about gender? Why is it important to be looking at gender and values in relation to decision-making on water? And then we will unpack together some of the key findings that we came across out of a literature review that we conducted to create a foundation for the work that we did on the gender journey. And of course, I welcome any questions later on this. So starting out with why gender matters. Maybe some of you have already seen the Equal Measures report, Equal Measures 2030 report, specifically on the 2024 SDG Gender Index, that has highlighted that no country is on track to achieve gender equality by 2030. In fact, even more, between 2019 and 2022, nearly 40% of countries stagnated or declined on gender equality. For me, these stats are a bit alarming considering the amount of work that's been done and the effort that's being put forward on achieving gender equality and the SDGs, and seeing that actually there isn't progress, we're in fact stagnating or declining. And of course, these are global, it's a global stocktake, and it may vary and differ across regions and countries, but I think it gives us a very good indication of where we're at. And then when we look at why does gender matter specifically in water, in fact, the numbers are also consistent. One quick clarification I want to make about terminology. So when we say gender, we're speaking about men, women, and non-binary people. And when we say female and male, we're speaking to the biological sex. In this case, stats from the World Bank Equal Aqua platform, and of course we know women are approximately 50% of the population, and yet in the water sector, they're still holding around 20% to 25% of positions in water utilities as workers, engineers, and managers. So this is already a clear indication that there isn't yet equal representation, which can have implications on how women's voices are heard within the sector and also across the different decision-making platforms on water governance. One last piece, and I'll talk a bit more about this in the findings from the literature review, is that a lot of literature has been pointing to how gender attempts at including gender equality in decision-making on water have not been as successful, particularly because often when women participate, or even when there are policies requiring women to participate for equal representation, there are other barriers in place that prevent women from really contributing at an equal value, meaning sometimes it's they feel they're present, but they're not listened to. Other times there are other barriers for why they don't feel safe to speak up. So we'll talk about these in a second. But before that, just flagging the point on values. I think this and the relevance of this webinar to share with you some of these findings is that we're kind of at the edge of a very up-and-coming field, a burgeoning field around values in governance. Key research from Schulz and colleagues have pointed out that any water governance issue, but especially conflicts around water governance, can always be traced back to a conflict of values between different stakeholders. And while often in water governance, the reliance tends to go on technical solutions or technical priorities, it's important to start to really shift perspectives to values. And this is what we hope to really drive as a message home today from this webinar. So we've been working with the 5 principles from the high-level panel for water, which one of them clearly indicates that it's about recognizing and embracing water's multiple values to different groups and interests in all decisions affecting water. So the gender journey has been really working with this principle. And these principles have been adopted also by the Valuing Water Initiative. So we said that in order to look at the different groups and interests, it's important to look at gender dynamics and water values associated with gender. And this brings us to our gender journey. To briefly outline our process, we conducted a literature review of 50 articles because we wanted to know what does the state of the art, what is it in the academic field, because they've conducted research on multiple case studies in different regions around the world. What can we learn from literature that specifically focuses on gender, values, and decision-making and water governance? And out of the 50 articles, I'll share the findings in a bit, but we complemented this research with a co-production process. There were focus groups conducted, surveys, interviews, and workshops. A lot of this was also especially for internally within the RVO team. And we had a set of outcomes, including a public report that will be released soon that hopefully will flag it for all of you joining us and interested in this conversation, and this public webinar to engage you in this discussion. So getting to the key findings, what was super interesting out of the results from the literature review is that we could see a clear distinction in how gender and values were considered. One surprising finding, and that maybe for some of you is not so surprising, is what we labeled as gender-based values. And this is the fact that women and men as gender groups may hold different values around water. And this is something that had, a little bit of tension around it because it may be dependent on context. There's a whole debate between nurture and nature, and we're not going to get into that. But specifically in terms of impacting water governance, yes, women and men will hold different values at times related to what priorities they see as more important in terms of water decision-making. So I'll keep this parked and I'll turn to the other one, which is gender equity values. This one is more about how do we value gender on water projects and in decision-making. So this, I feel, has been much more talked about in policy spaces and in academic literature because it's pointing to equal representation of genders and how do we achieve that. But also more than that, about equity. Equity is trying to remove the structural barriers that would prevent equal gender participation and equal power dynamics, for example, between men and women in the same room. So these were the 2 categories, and you'll see now from the findings how they've shaped up around these. We distilled the findings from the literature review into 6 key points, and I'm going to walk you through each one of them individually. And for anyone who's an academic or interested in the actual literature, on the right-hand side, you'll see the literature that references these points, but also you can always reach out to me and I can make the database available for where we have all of these articles. So the first key point was that gender is a key valuational differentiation in water management. What does that mean? So actually what it means is that the field of water management and water diplomacy has a legacy of being male dominated. So there have been more men holding positions of decision-making and technical roles in the sector for many more years. And this is slowly changing. Many more women are engaging and being included. But what that has led to is that, for example, qualities that are associated with being successful in these roles are often associated with male qualities. And so the literature speaks about this as being a masculinization of the water sector. This is one aspect of the findings. The second point is about men and women. This is very much a gender-based value here. Men and women tend to have different priorities, needs, and values when it comes to water. I'm going to specifically point to two examples. The first one from the literature was speaking about how women prefer to have domestic water supply and irrigation structures closer to their households for easier division between productive and domestic responsibilities. Men, on the other hand, are more mobile, so the location of supply is less important to them. Other literature, specifically one by Margaret Zwartveen on a case study in Nepal in the Chatis Mauja irrigation system, found that men and women who worked together as co-farmers had different water priorities. Men focused on early season water for land preparation, while women emphasized the need for consistent water flow to prevent weed growth in rice paddies. So in this point specifically, these differences highlight how gender considerations shape data collection, they even shape model calibration, and of course, they shape and inform the reporting on water management. On the third point, the finding pointed to organizational culture playing a large role in prioritizing or not a gender focus. Organizational culture is the formal and informal relationships that you have within an organization, and many of us work in organizations, so I think we understand what that means. But here, the level or the extent to which an organization or team members within an organization choose to really tackle a gender challenge in their projects or in their day-to-day activities depends on this organizational culture. Research findings point out that gender considerations have often fallen to tokenistic approaches or have reduced women's roles in relation to water to simplistic stereotypes. And so they failed to address deeper issues like unequal water rights or biased methods of measuring water usage that may disadvantage women. And so it's important to address these gender biases and incorporate gender dimensions from values to needs, or even to structural inequalities inside an organization's culture. And this will ultimately enhance the integration of gender equality ideals across projects, from team hiring and formation of the team all the way through to execution and assessment and reporting. I will try to go slightly faster because I think I'm running out of time on the next set of points, which reinforce each other, I think. So the fourth point is maybe not so surprising for many of us, that underrepresentation of women in decision-making detracts from gender-based values being reflected. Results from the research have found that women are still underrepresented in river basin organizations and water user associations. And this body of research is recommending that gender-based values, in order for them to be really reflected, they need to be through equitable representation, and not just equal representation, but creating spaces where women, for example, in a room feel capable and safe enough to express their voice and their values. Oops. The next point builds on the previous one, that gender norms in participation have been replicating old patterns and gender roles. This is perhaps where cultural norms also come into conversation. So what was for me surprising from this finding is that it contradicts the idea that community-based governance of water leads to equitable participation and empowerment of women, because this is what we often hear. And it doesn't mean that that's not true, but it means that it's not consistent. So research has shown indeed that water user associations do not guarantee equitable gender participation, depending on the norms, cultural or organizational, and the policies in place. One key thing I want to highlight on this point is that there are, of course, multiple factors that influence, women, like gender roles in participation spaces. Some of them include I've mentioned before, women not feeling safe that their voice will be heard, but others include things that people may not think about directly, which is that women may not be compensated for their time away from other work when they're often more economically disadvantaged. And so it takes a lot more of them to have to give up something to be able to be present in these spaces and meetings that are often on a voluntary basis. And the last point is that strategies for gender equitable outcomes are necessary to better incorporate gender values in decision-making, but alone, they're not enough. So here, the literature, I'll give you one example. The Kenyan public policy has institutionalized various measures to reduce gender inequality. And one of these measures is that limiting representation of either men or women to no more than 2/3 in any governance arrangements. But while these policies are effective as a first step, they're not enough without reinforcement and without awareness raising and capacity building across the diverse gender groups, meaning having men on board as well, so that it's not only women rallying for being equally represented, but that men are also supporting in this process. I think on this note, I will leave it because I probably went just a bit over my time. So if you have any questions, I have my email here, but also you're welcome to write your questions in the chat. And with this, I will stop sharing my presentation.
Thanks so much, Donna. That was great. I know we're a little bit over time, but those are really good points. And if you just go through them without the examples, you lose a lot of the richness, I know. So this was really great. Thank you for that. I do want to jump in and bring in the rest of the panel. So Yara, I would like to introduce our first panelist, Yara Fernandes, who's the Chief of Party at the Nature Conservancy, overseeing all aspects of the Hearth Okavango project. She has extensive experience in leadership of international development projects and a master's in development studies. Yara's expertise leads to creating and implementing programs that address the intersection of gender and social and economical resources, ensuring that women's voices are not only heard, but prioritized in decision-making processes. Welcome, Yara.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
So happy to have you here. So I'm going to start you off and let you introduce yourself through the answer to a question, and I will try to keep us to time on that. In your experience working on gender and water decision making, particularly on transboundary management projects like the Okavango one, do you see any tension between valuing and promoting social resilience, particularly for women?
Well, thank you very much indeed for this wonderful opportunity to discuss, this immensely relevant and priority issues in the water and the water transboundary resource management. I think Donna did a fantastic introduction, really. Unfortunately, yes, the tensions are there, and I think Donna presented results and clear data from literature review. I mean, it is true that despite the many strides that we have been making in the last decades to conceptualize gender, resilience, and water management, the tensions are there. I mean, in general, women still lack efficient legal, socioeconomic, political, technological systems that are favorable to them. So we are still building a social economic environment. I mean, Donna presented something very interesting that is, we are lagging far behind in actually reaching and achieving the gender goals that we all, globally propose to. And I've read in one of our forums, Catherine, that we are actually going backwards in some of the indicators in terms of gender. But the reality is that this literature review, the studies, the evidence-based research that we have on transboundary water basin decision-making for, and this is worldwide, not only here in the Okavango or the Southern African region, but really in so many parts of the world, women are still lagging behind, both as practitioners and leadership positions. And therefore, in my opinion, to overcome these tensions, we need to address practical needs in a way that will take care of the barriers that stop us women, both rural, urban, practitioners, diplomats, and so on, to really being full partners in transboundary water management. I mean, as a practitioner myself in the field for over 2 decades now, we see a growing positive awareness that the use, management, protection of this water resources, being transboundary, national, regional, it's still very much embedded really in complex political and social cultural settings. So again, you know, borrowing on Dona's words, we need governance arrangements that are designed, I think, and led by women. But very importantly, and this is something that we are pushing really in our work here in the Okavango Basin, is really to have supportive men who understand the need for inclusion of this women. I mean, without that, I don't think we are going to be able to reach the top of the mountain, if I can put it this way. And then I think there's also another tension, which is the concept of promoting social resilience. I mean, social resilience already includes a broad-based, multi-sectorial development for women's basics. But now we need to also include another very important concept, which is, you know, how do women address, manage, work, and are capacitated in water management. And one thing as a practitioner that I see, and Dona again touched upon that, is that we really need more data mapping, data research on how we can ease this persistent social and economic tensions that affect particularly women in the transboundary sector and in decision making. Because we need to understand really the economic costs, the value chains in transboundary water management for women, and we need to understand how can the gender concept, the gender equality concept, or, you know, looking at the gender equity values, how all of this multitude of challenges can play a role. In the Okavango Basin, we are seeing that acute poverty, malnutrition, child mortality, they all need to be included in the analysis of the transboundary water management approaches. So expanding evidence base, you know, gather, present, discuss existing new and forthcoming research and knowledge, such as the one Donald presented, is what's, and obviously including feminist-based approaches, evaluations, monitoring, and etc. It's, I think, critical for us to look into empowering women in WRM and transboundaries. Thank you.
Oh, thanks, Yara. That's really great, and such a sort of holistic but deep view of all of those intersections. So thanks for that. I'd like to ask Dennis, our final panelist, to join us, and I'll give you an intro question, Dennis. So Dennis van Peppen is the lead for international water programs at the RVO, which is the Netherlands Enterprise and Development Agency. And he has experience in project and program management in both public and private sectors, and a passion for water management, but also international development, international politics, and international political economy. So thanks for joining us today, Dennis. Really happy to have you here.
Thank you.
I'm going to ask you a question and give you 4 minutes. And from this government angle that you have, can you share experience with water policy implementation, working internationally with RVO? Has gender ever come up in a surprising way for you?
Yes, absolutely. And thank you for inviting me. And it's really an honor to be here in this gender journey, which I think is very, very important. I'm very happy that the Valuing Water Initiative is doing this, and that we get so much more spotlight on the importance of gender in values in decision making. So that's great. So to answer your question, well, yes, absolutely. And there's positive ones and negative ones. So just you know, we are working with our programs all over the world, and I'm currently involved, for example, in Pakistan, where we are supporting, or we're trying to support Pakistan in becoming more resilient from a perspective of flood management after the big disaster in 2022, when a big part of the country was flooded and about 2,000 people lost their lives, and there were a lot of refugees. And we just held through our local liaisons roundtables where we spoke to community leaders and to local NGOs. And one of the things that struck me, and you can hardly believe that it still exists, but it does still exist, as a negative example, is that the local Pakistani government, they established relief camps for climate refugees, for these flood refugees. but they forgot to build wash facilities for women, which made it for many women and families actually difficult to stay in the camps. Well, I think that's a general problem in the wash sector, where gender values are not taken sufficiently in consideration, where design is not taking gender in consideration, and that's making life very hard for women. So that's a very concrete example, negative example, where there's still, I think still a lot of work needs to be done. On the other hand, I also see a lot of positive developments. For example, we are doing work in Kenya on locally led adaptation, and I was fortunate enough to visit there and met some fantastic female community leaders that are actually making a difference, and where you see where female leadership is leading to different outcomes, and where local water resources are being managed in a much more equitable way. And what struck me also is that they're inclusive leaders, and they're making sure that also they take the men on board. So men are not excluded, but they're included in, let's say, the social enterprise in this particular case, which makes it that that you get a much more you get also from a general landscape perspective a much better outcome and a stable community. And then the final example, which is a bit close to home, of course. Well, I'm from the Dutch water sector, and as you all know, water is part of our DNA. We do a lot with water. 40% of our country is under sea level, and you see that our water sector has changed over the past 10 years significantly. So many more women have entered the water sector. You have seen the discourse and the discussions and the way of looking at water governance, which has become much more focused on different disciplines, except for engineering, much more intention for inclusiveness. And in general, it helped the water sector to come more out of its silo, because I think one of the big problems that the international water sector has is that it's really, very much engineering driven and basically being a water bubble. And I think, let's say, having more women involved makes it that we are, slowly getting out of that bubble. So those examples, hope that answers your question.
That's great, Dennis. No, those are all really good examples. Donna, come and join us on the panel, spotlight you, and I will just kind of respond. I really loved the example from Pakistan, because I think it got to some of Yara's point, which is practical needs, and also just the reality that there are a couple of things that don't require that women be part of the conversation to be beneficiaries of gender equity, right? So, just having a standard question of, does every group have what they need for the wash facilities? You could have an all male engineering group, as long as they are thinking of that question, then that's done. And I know that that's one of the things that we struggle with is in some of these situations, as Donna was saying, the time that the women in these community levels would be asked to step away from their families. They might be the caregivers of multiple generations. They just may not be able to. They may not want to, because they already have quite a lot of a burden. So what are the things that can be done as a water sector, regardless of the type of work that we do, that can kind of think through these things and think about all the different groups? So I think this is just really timely. I want to get a broad conversation going. And so one of the things that I want to do is ask your question. So we had, like I said at the beginning, some really amazing questions from everyone who registered, and we've chosen 3 of those, and we're asking that you vote. So you should now see a poll 2 up on your screen, and we're going to ask you, which of these options would you like the panel to answer first? So it will be your choice. I'm going to give you a minute to look at those questions. They're all really good. I like all of them. And we'll see what come up. I'm going to give people about 15 more seconds to vote. I know it's hard to only pick one, but we'll do our best to answer 2 out of 3 if that helps. Okay. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And I'm going to end the poll. All right. And the third option has it. So who from the panel would like to take how do you get higher ups to understand the importance of women in water and pay more attention to gender equality? Who wants to take that on, I think? Dennis, do you want to try
Yeah,
that
sure. Let
one?
me have a go. Yes.
Yeah, since
Well,
you're the team lead.
yeah. So that was question number 3, right?
Mhm.
Yeah. So basically, I think what's very important, gender inclusion or gender equality should not be an end to itself. I think we should always talk about, the outcomes and what we want to achieve. We all want to achieve better water resource management. We want more inclusion. We want vulnerable people to be served with sufficient water. We want that all people have good access to sanitation facilities. And I think involving more women in decision making or listening more to women lead to these better outcomes. And I think you can even scientifically prove that. So I think if we have the conversation from that angle, instead of look, we need more gender, I think you have a better conversation because, as I said, I think it's proven that if you include more women in decision making or you listen more to the needs of women, then in the end it will improve your water governance, leading to better outcomes for all.
That's great. Thanks. Yara or Donna, just want to invite you if you want to jump in.
Well, sure. I mean, definitely what we need to see here is this multi-sectorial complex thematic areas, bridging all of them together. I know that, the third question which we are not going to, the third option in the poll, which was source protection versus downstream use. So I think we should take in the narrative that we use, for instance, the versus. So we are not talking about either or. This is all bridging together, in order for us to push women into decision-making fora. Disproportionate lack of data in so many of these regions throughout the world does have a significant impact on us securing women's voices, and their economic, social, political, cultural safety. But we really need to start exposing more frequently women into these structures, but also women from the communities. Women that are actually the ones who are going to be, the primary benefits of these changes, because then we also have the discussions between urban, rural, and so many other dimensions as well. So I think all of this together needs to be put into a very clear framework roadmap on how we really want to upscale a woman's decision-making and women's agency, really, in these positions and in this decision-making for us. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a perfect segue to the fact that the second highest rated question was number 1. And Donna, I think you had been eager, based on your presentation, to kind of maybe delve into a little bit more. So that question is, what strategies can we use to involve women in developing countries more effectively as decision makers and stakeholders? So Donna, I'll turn it over to you, and then Yara or Dennis, if you want to add on, feel free.
Yeah, thank you. I guess, this builds on the conversation happening already with the other question. But I think here, so the way I'm seeing it is, of course, there's a top-down approach, there's a bottom-up approach. So you have a lot of policies and frameworks in place, whether at the international level or national level in many countries, that support this process of engaging and enabling and empowering more women to step into leadership roles, especially in the water sector and on decision-making. And I think where that isn't going into implementation is where it needs to be picked up bottom up. And I think this is where, creating within organizations, for example, small groups that are gender focused on this topic and that start to rally the higher ups around, saying, here's the SDGs, here's, other frameworks. We would like to ensure that our organization is also on board. We see this as an important conversation to be had internally is one way. But to answer the second question, in terms of particularly developing countries and engaging women, because of course, as you all heard from the literature review, that often this is where it falls off a little bit in terms of progress. These engagement strategies haven't been so effective. So what's being recommended? There are multiple strategies that can work. I think the one that has worked the most has been enabling capacity building spaces and sessions that may be women only, that actually support the women of a particular community to understand how to engage in these platforms of decision making, whether at a very local scale within their rural community, or whether it's a bit more at a municipal level or at a higher level of governance. That's one aspect, and I believe there's the one paper that Catherine, you and I were discussing from the World Bank. That's a working paper about a specific case. Now I can't remember the exact case, but it was in India, and it was looking at how even small tweaks like placing a female chair in a particular meeting will make participating groups feel also like they have more space and feel safe to have their voice not only heard, but also taken into account. And I think ultimately, other than these capacity building strategies, is also to focus on men in these communities to really support the bringing on board of women in ways that don't replicate gender norms. And this is where it gets tricky, because it's a very fine line between how far to intervene in changing gender roles in a particular context. But if there are more conversations that are had among members of a community themselves to see the value, again, the value of bringing women on board and the different values they hold around water, that might be a really nice entry point for shifting dynamics.
That's great. I am conscious that we really only have a couple of minutes left. Get really great comments on the chat. It's saying, yes, I've been the only woman in the room. A lot's been done. We've got a long way to go. So that's great. I've also seen the big question in the chat that's come through has been about kind of what will we see? Will we see more of these findings from the gender journey? So you'll see in the chat there's an answer, and yes, the Valuing Water Initiative's website will have a final report coming soon. So if you were excited about some of the presentational aspects and the research, you can get in touch with Dona or look for that report coming out soon. So just to address some of the conversation that's going on in the chat, we haven't had as many questions coming in live, but we have more from really great questions that came in when you registered. So want to make space for those. Anyone want to take this one? Do you think our resilience and proactive water management decisions are affected by gender imbalance at the top? I'm going to say yes, but if anyone wants to expand on that, opening it up to any of our panelists. Just
I can just, yeah, just very quickly, I think in the context of development, we really need to look at gender-based resilience. We talk about resilience, we talk about the concept of resilience, but we need to look at gender-based resilience. And I think that's how we're going to correctly bridge, any humanitarian responses, for instance, in this region. So I'm thinking about the drought now in Southern Africa and the longer term impact and development for women and these communities. And again, I think we know that there is a frequent exposure to to multiple and interlinked resilience challenges. So which actually is slowing down, gender-based values in source water protections and downstream uses and so on. So how do we really look into how these threats impact the sustainability of our programmatic interventions, of the decision-making, of governance structures, and how we can all together work in capacitating in order to respond again to these challenges. In Angola, for instance, to give an example on what we are doing around here, we are working to secure the Cuito and the Cubango River flows that flows all the way to Botswana in the Great Okavango Basin. And what we are doing is we're trying to enable communities and governance structures, and particularly women, to have improved and accessible water and sanitation services. WASH, for instance, and I know there's another question in WASH, but WASH is very much interlinked with the resilience of communities and of women. And so again, comes back to my point that I've made in earlier on, which is, it's a multitude of an agenda that we need to look into as we move along and as we work in building resilience in women's fora. Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, no, I think that's great. Dennis, please jump in.
Yeah, sure. No, I concur. I definitely agree with Yara. It's I mean, the problem is often that, and I come from a country also where water decision making is male dominated. It was, and it still is a little bit. And you see that with male dominated decision making, that the attention for, let's say, more engineering, technocratic, and economic issues related to water management and water decision making and to resilience building is dominating. And that other issues, important issues such as the interest of vulnerable communities or nature is often received less attention. And when you have the conversation, of course, it becomes important. But in the initial let's say deliberations, there's always very unilateral views on the more technocratic engineering aspects of things, and of course you can never generalize it because not all men are the same and not all women are the same. But I do see some some similarities and commonalities existing in water decision making. So yes, I definitely do feel, without that being very scientifically grounded, that there's it's the decision making is lopsided, so to say.
Yeah, and you do see that I can't cite you verse across that, but this is actually what you've described, Dennis, is something that they're saying not just in the water sector, but in a lot of sectors where they introduce the technology as if the technology solves the problem. And I think maybe at some point during the journey, Donna and I had this conversation where I said, my background's analytical chemistry, love nothing more, right, than a new process to do things. But that's the thing, is it really is a process. It's not just about the new technology. Like, the technology can only get you so far. And one of the things that I think when we have a very technocratic solution, we're forgetting the fact that the problem is people. And we've got different groups, everybody's thinking about things differently, and you need a really diverse leadership and decision making to think about those different viewpoints. And as you said, gender equality is not an end of itself, but when we look at trying to solve the Sustainable Development Goals, and especially water and sanitation for all is everyone, and we need very holistic and wide, diverse thinking and understanding how everyone is using this resource in order for us to be able to actually achieve the SDGs. So I do see bringing gender equality into this and really centralizing it as a way to actually improve things for everyone. And as everyone said, the need to bring everyone along, and that this will actually make things better for men too. This isn't sort of weird, it's not a small pie that one group needs more of than the other. It's really an expansion. Go ahead, Dennis.
Yeah, it's just one final comment. I mean, I just had a conversation with one of the young female talents in my team about, what do you think that women bring to water management, water decision making? I said, well, actually, I really believe, and she's also quite new to the water sector, that we put more light and more attention on the spotlight and attention on, let's say, the soft side of water management, which is finally getting more traction and more attention. And I'm with the soft side. I mean the fact that it's not always about dikes, levees, and treatment plants, but it's about the people that are living in river basins, and it's about having the conversations with those people and taking care of the incident and also trying to imagine what they feel. And I see myself personally through colleagues like that they actually they bring a different perspective, and they have more attention to that soft side. And that soft side is such a still undervalued, but such an essential part of water management, which we're only now exploring, which only now gets the attention that it deserves. And yeah, we need more women in order to improve water management through the soft side of things.
I mean, just quickly, just to give an example of what Dennis just said, in our programmatic interventions here in the Okavango, we had government officials thinking that water resource management for us was to actually work into infrastructure and, the classical idea of what water resource management is. And indeed, what we are seeing now is definitely that it entails much more than that. So the soft approach is very much needed in order for us to bring into the attention of what we mean with transboundary water management, bringing gender and women into the forefront of these discussions. And just very quickly, just to add on what Dona said about the participatory, about the approaches, on what can we do to actually help and sustain women's voices in this. And one of the things that we are seeing that it's really, really having a huge impact, and in less than a year, we've seen this happening in the Okavango, in the area that we are working, is uniting really women in building this resilience. So action groups, cooperatives, regional groups, community groups, they really work very well with governance structures, whether it's traditional leaders and traditional authorities, government authorities. This is what we are seeing, and this is a very unmeasured factor. This participatory approach that we see in transformational leadership of women in these communities, of women in regional and national decision-making positions. But we are seeing that by providing really this collective voice, we are also multiplying the effect of bringing it to the attention of these issues. So definitely uniting women into community action groups is one of the way forwards, at least from our experience here in the Okavango region.
Yara, that's such a great example. We are very close to time. I have really enjoyed this conversation, and I wish I weren't having to do this. But we're going to do our final tour de table. So last sort of 30 seconds, what do you want to make sure, if it's only one point, what do you want people to take home with them today? Dona, go.
For me, I think what would be an invitation for everyone tuned into this conversation is to really start to bring this idea of gender-based values around water into your projects, into your teams, into your conversations, recognizing and noticing the nuances of how different genders are valuing water differently. Where can we sort of even out the playing field, not only by having equal representation, but going beyond, and even going beyond equity to the point that we start to really see how we're incorporating the different values into the same decision-making process. So I hope that
Gonna stop you there. That's perfect. That's great. Dennis, final thought.
Yeah, just real quick. So one of the questions that wasn't addressed was about let's say I would call the tokenism gap or trap. So how do we make sure that gender doesn't become a tokenism? And for that, I think it's really important that we'll not step into the trap, but we have sincere conversations about the importance of gender and what does it bring and why does it bring better outcomes.
Perfect. Thank you. Yara, please finish us off. Close this out.
Very quickly. Yes, building on what Dona said, and Dennis too. I mean, what we need is really an holistic strategy. On one hand, to strengthen women's individuals' resilience, empowering women and their communities. But also, on the other hand, we need to start looking into the capacities of governance structures and partners to really express what gender-based values in water resource management means for us. Thank you.
Thank you all three, Yara, Donna, Dennis. This has been such a pleasure. I wish we could go on all day, but I know we and everyone here live does have to get on with their day. So thank you so much for your insights. Thank you all, everyone who gave us registration questions. I'm sorry we couldn't get to all of them, but they were really fantastic. So I will pass it over to Sophia to close us out, and I'll end the recording now. No,
Thank you so much. I want to make an invitation to all of you to turn on your camera if you're comfortable with it, and give a big visual clap to our panelists, speaker, moderator, and IT team who has been so helpful today making this happening. Thank you for joining us today. I want to give a special thanks to Sonia and to Joanna, who have been behind the IT and making sure that this webinar went through smoothly, but also to our three panelists, Dennis, Yara, and Donna, with your keynote. Thank you so much for enlightening us. And Catherine, you are giving us great moderation as usual, and also the platform to make this happen.